Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to Rushcliffe Borough Council's Corporate Governance Scrutiny Group meeting. I'd like to remind everyone that the meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, and a recording of the meeting will be available afterwards on the Council's YouTube channel. In addition, under the Local Authorities Executive Arrangements, Meetings and Access to Information England Regulations 2012, other people may film, record, tweet or blog from this meeting. The use of any such images or sound recordings is not under the Council's control. May I remind councillors to switch your microphones off when you are not speaking. So thank you. We do have some presenters today, so I'd like to welcome two people who've not come from externally before, and that's Max Armstrong from BDO and Mark Surridge from Bethan Flood, sorry, from May. Just point out that we are changing the agenda order and we are swapping item 10, the annual governance statement, with item 11, the constitution. So we will look at the constitution as item 10 after the external audit annual plan. And I'd like now to move the first item on the agenda, and that's apologies for absence. And I'm told that there are no apologies, and looking around the room, we're all here. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Minutes of the meeting on the 23rd of February 2023. As obviously this is a new term for the council, those minutes, there are only two members from the previous group who were present for those minutes. So could I ask them if they're happy to propose and second those minutes? Councillor Gowland?
I'll propose them.
Thank you. So I will sign those as a record of the meeting. Okay. Number 4 on the agenda is the role and remit of the Governance Scrutiny Group. So I'll hand over to Sarah Whittaker, who's going to talk us through why we're here today.
Thank you, Joe. So what you've got in front of you on your desks is just a very brief overview of the role and remit of the Governance Scrutiny Group. In the main, our reports that we go through at this group are retrospective, and they do come on a regular basis, so you'll see them sort of every quarter or every mid-year and end-year. A lot of them are also statutory reports. The information that we get, as I've said, does come through the year, and so what you're seeing in this meeting is sort of the cumulative effect of those reports during the year, which obviously Councillor Sims and Councillor Gallen will have seen throughout the year. So it's usually a full governance scrutiny group is usually quite a full agenda, although it doesn't tend to take any longer than any of the other groups. So we usually are finished on time with the occasional early start. And it's usually quite a diverse agenda as well. So as you can see from what's in front of you, that we do review internal and external audit reports. We monitor the annual governance statement, the statement of accounts on an annual basis, and the going concern report, and also risk, and also the treasury management or the capital and investment strategy, and what is now quarterly reporting on that, and also items in relation to the council's constitution. I support this group along with Peter Linfield, Section 151 officer on occasions, and resourcing is within existing budgets. And that is all.
Okay.
Thank you. So just by way of introduction, given there's new people, obviously lots of new people around the table, I'm Gurpreet Dule. I'm a director at BDO. So I oversee the internal audit service, and I'm joined by my colleague Max Armstrong, who's a manager at BDO, who oversees the day-to-day delivery of the service. Obviously, after today and as things go on, if there's any feedback, appreciate there's a lot of new members, any questions, please feed them back to myself, obviously to Pete, and we can take that on board as this group evolves. There are 3 papers today. Firstly is our progress report, which gives you an update on the work we've been doing over the last quarter. So Max will be taking that paper. There are 3 reports in there as well, which will be summarised by Max. There's our annual opinion, which I will talk us through, and then our annual fraud report as well, which I'll summarise for you too. So I'll hand over to Max, but as I said, I appreciate that's lots of new members. If there are any questions, please raise them, and we'll take them as appropriate.
Thank you. So I'll commence with the progress report, which starts on page 17 of your packs. So for this committee, I'll be presenting the summary for the 3 reviews we've completed for this audit committee. So these are channel shift, safeguarding, and sustainable warmth. And we've also got our head of internal audit opinion and the annual fraud report, which are the next 2 items on the agenda. So we'll come on to that after. And then looking ahead to the next committee, just so you're aware of what will be coming for the September committee. We've got our reconciliations, main financial systems and markets reviews, which are all part of the 23-24 plan. So we're starting work on that. So to move on to page 20 of your packs, this table shows the progress of our 22-23 plan. So you'll see we've substantially completed the plan. There's 1 review on project management at the bottom, which is currently, we're not quite at the finalisation stage. But this is actually an additional piece of work looking at 1 specific project. And we did do a project management review earlier in the year, which had a moderate substantial opinion. And then the following page shows our 23-24 work. So we're still at the planning phase for most of our reviews, albeit we've scoped and got terms of references in place for the vast majority. We have completed our fraud report, which, as I say, will be coming on in the following few agenda items, so I'll let Gertrude explain that in more detail. So to move on to the channel shift review, so that the summary starts on page 22. So this is a review we provided substantial assurance for both control design and effectiveness, with just 2 low findings. So this review looked at how the council are moving its communication with customers to more of a digital platform as opposed to face-to-face and telephone calls. Within this review, we looked at the overarching customer access strategy, financial and cost savings to be gained from the channel shift, and then also how data is used internally and from customer feedback to understand actually what customers want and support that transition. So the 2 findings really relate, 1 to the collating of the financial savings within the transformation strategy, just to improve that communication of where those savings are and that monitoring. And then also the KPIs within the customer service action plan, just to tailor those slightly more to create smart smart KPIs, which I suppose improves that measurement and monitoring process. Moving on to the safeguarding review we completed, where we've provided substantial opinion for the control design and moderate for the control effectiveness. We've raised 2 medium findings within this review and 1 low finding. So as you're aware, a borough council will have much fewer duties around safeguarding compared to, say, a county council. So our review generally looked more at the sort of policies and procedures in place, also the cooperation with other partners through the various partnerships in Nottinghamshire. And then also looking at actually staff who require DBS checks, how that's identified and whether they're up to date and in place. So the 2 medium findings we've raised here, 1 relates to the governance of safeguarding and the internal steering group in place to monitor safeguarding and compliance within the council. So the finding here really relates to the fact that there was only, so they're meant to be held every 4 months, but there was a big gap between the 2, between September 2021 and September 2022. And then also within that, there was no representation from leisure services, which I'm sure you understand has quite a key role within safeguarding due to the sort of nature of the work. And then also around the training side on safeguarding as well, where only 20% of staff hadn't completed their sort of mandatory e-learning modules, which obviously again are critical to keep that knowledge on safeguarding up to date. And then finally, the sustainable warmth review, where again we provided a substantial opinion for both control design and control effectiveness with only 2 low findings again. So this review really looked at the council's management of the Sustainable Warmth Grant, which is administered through the Midlands Energy Hub. And the aim of the grant is to improve energy efficiency in the low-income households within the borough. So the findings, so our review looked at how the grant monies were managed, where they essentially managed in line with the agreements for the grant, and then reporting back into the Midlands Energy Hub. So the first low finding was for the contract itself with E.ON, and I think we understand it was rolled forward from the previous grant. So our recommendation is more around essentially for every grant there should be a new contract in place. And then finally, the letter of intent with E.ON wasn't a record of the signed copy by both parties wasn't available during our review. So that summarises the 3 audits we've completed in this period. We've also provided a sector update, which I'll allow you to read at your leisure, which provides some sort of, I guess, interesting updates in the local government sector more broadly. So I'll now pause at this stage and invite any questions at all.
So, anyone got any questions they'd like to raise? Councillor Calvert?
Yeah, just could I have some clarification on the scoring system? This is all new to me, so need a bit of explanation. With using safeguarding as an example, if I may, you've got recommendation 0, 2, and 1. The report to me seems to suggest that there's some serious problems here with safeguarding. I know you say that the number of staff involved compared with the county is a lot less, but you only need 1 bad apple, if you like. So is the 2 where there's a substantial problem and 1 where it's moderate, or is it the other way around? Oh, sorry, I haven't turned off. So.
Can you also, Councillor Calvert, when you're speaking, can you try and pull your laptop back a bit? Yeah, I know it's new to a lot of us.
So within each report, when we identify a finding, we classify it as either high, medium, or low. Yes, in terms of significance of the finding. And in the back of, I think it's in the back of one of the reports, it gives a definition. A high is something that we think the authority need to act upon immediately, because if they don't, they're at danger of not meeting their objectives and there's a material risk that's present. A medium risk is something that we feel requires improvement, but just not to that level of significance. And a low is more best practice, and this is something that the local authority should do, but it's obviously not as urgent and pressing. The 0, 2, and 1 that you refer to is that there are 0 high findings, 2 medium findings, and 1 low finding. So that's the 2 and the 1 that Max was referring to. So in the safeguarding report, there are 2 mediums, 1 around training, the other around governance, and then a low finding as well. We haven't identified any high findings. So whilst I agree with you, it is very important to make sure that staff are all fully trained, and it is important around the governance arrangements, meeting frequently and having leisure services be present. There are strong management responses, and we know that those arrangements are now happening more frequently. Training, even when mandatory across many authorities, is rarely 100%, even though mandatory would suggest it should be. Our experience from lots of local authorities is that's the case. Where you had critical roles with people who were actively close to potential safeguarding risks, training compliance levels were even higher. And so those 20% are often for roles where they may not be as significant. And plus, obviously, staff who are identified at being at potential higher risk or having more access to people who may be vulnerable, also go through DBS checks as well. And we had evidence that that was done. And so that's why we say actually the overall control environment is designed effectively, designed substantially, and that everything's in place to allow the authority to meet its objectives. That's why the opinion on design is substantial, which is our highest opinion. The effectiveness we've said is moderate, which is 1 step down, but still a thumbs up, because the council could improve their training compliance, particularly to then push that bar a little bit further. I hope that helps explain a bit more about the opinion.
Just to add, if you go to page, I think it's page 34, that's where there's a key, and it gives you an explanation of the. I do appreciate you've got a lot of papers here, so it's easy for someone. It's easy for someone to explain it.
Indeed, yeah. So, Councillor Calvert, I think that probably answers the question and reassures you, I hope, that we're doing actually not, there aren't any major causes for concern, but there are things that we need to look at and make sure that we move forwards. Any other? Councillor Sims?
Yeah, I noted again with the safeguarding, it does concern me that DBS check-in, by the looks of things, is not, we haven't got robust policies and procedures or the procedures in practice in place. Is that what you found? That the service managers, what I've read is that there's gaps in checking for DBS requirements. What is that all about? Why is that failed? Surely that should be implicit within the processes and systems of the organisation.
Sorry, I think you're
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's the annual report you're seeing there. So linking into that point around the DBS check. So what we found, which is our lowest significant point, is the annual review of the DBS checks wasn't happening so much in previous years to check that those DBS certificates are still valid, up to date, and then equally staff who need those DBS checks are having them in place. Albeit from our conversations and taking on this recommendation on board, that is something the council are looking to implement to ensure they're up to date. So actually on the roles where we would expect staff to have an enhanced DBS check, because they're working sort of directly with children, vulnerable adults, that they were in place and they were tracked internally. It's just, I guess, just tightening up the whole environment to make sure they don't fall out of date or something's not missed there, which is why we've raised that as a low.
So there was a gap in the system, but the gap is, you're now assured that it's being
That's
sure.
correct, yeah.
Right, okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything?
Just one really quick
Councillor
question,
Gowland, yeah.
Same area, of course. The issue with the leisure services not attending the internal steering group, I don't really know what the internal steering group is. Do you know, and it may not be a question for you, if there are methods of ensuring that the companies involved, the companies running the leisure services on behalf of the council do have appropriate safeguarding procedures in place, or is that beyond the scope of this report, or is that, surely the council should be checking that anyhow?
So I think that area sort of broadly did sit slightly outside of the scope. So what our review, looking at the internal steering group, is looking at the general governance, what's reported back into the council around safeguarding, whether that be any sort of specific concerns or more broadly things like compliance there. So I don't want to throw you under the bus, but whether Peter or Sarah can add anything on that point at all, whether those checks are done. It slightly sits outside the scope of our review, but I'll invite them to add any comments to that.
Well, it's well and truly flattened by the size of the horse. No, I'll as Sarah said, I'll come back to you on that.
Okay,
I'll
that's
double
fine.
check.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions? So that basically covers the progress report for Q4. So find my right bit of the agenda. So we're just being asked to recommend that Governance Scrutiny Group notes the Q4 progress report for 22-23 prepared by the Council's internal auditor. So is everybody happy to note that? Thank you. Okay. So moving on to item 6 is the actual annual report, the internal audit annual report. So back to our guests.
Thank you. I should be a little bit shorter on this. There's obviously a lot of detail in the previous paper. So a requirement for us is that each year we provide an annual opinion and an annual report based on everything we've done in the previous year. So Max talked about the various reviews that we have done in the previous year in that table in the progress report. That's summarised on the inside page on this report. You can see it flows from the bullets from risk management, fraud report, safeguarding, etc. So this is now to summarise all the work that we've done in the year and to provide an opinion. When we provide an opinion, we provide one of 4 opinions. So substantial is the highest opinion, moderate is the next one, limited or no assurance. I'm pleased to say for now the second year in a row, we've reached a substantial opinion for this council. And what we are saying therefore is from the work that we have done and other sources of assurance, such as external audit colleagues and the quality and the nature of financial accounts as well. Our view on the authority's ability to follow up on recommendations. So where we've raised recommendations previously, we follow those up to see whether they're done, because actually that's the proof that things are improving. There's a very high compliance rate that we see with that, and management engage with that well. You'll see from the reports that we have, they've all received moderate or substantial during the year, with a high volume of substantial. The number of mediums has reduced this year compared to the previous year as well, and there weren't any high findings. If it gives you some further comfort as well around our opinion, I think I said this last year as well, we as in BDO undertake a head of internal audit position with local authorities at a large volume of local authorities. Rushcliffe is the only one who's received substantial. It is a rare thing. Everyone else receives moderate or limited. Rushcliffe was the only one, which probably accords also with the nomination for Council of the Year, which unfortunately didn't quite get over the line with, but speaks to the wider picture of things that we're seeing from our work, that we feel the control environment is operating well. Now that could change in the following year depending on reviews we do, and we may identify things, but it's good to see that now 2 years in a row there's that consistent picture. So I'll pause there because it repeats things that have been previously presented to this group, but we've issued a substantial opinion for the year.
Okay. Obviously, clearly that's very good, and it's reassuring to have you say that compared with all the other councils that you do. Has anyone got any questions to add or on that, or are we all bowled over by our substantial review? Councillor Gowland.
Perhaps we should just congratulate the staff.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you. Yes, yeah. I think it does actually.
Just to say as well, it's the councillors as well. They are involved in the process.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm doing my best.
Yeah. So obviously we should thank the staff, but we should also thank the councillors for their involvement. But I think most of us are very proud that we are councillors in Rushcliffe, whatever our opinions politically. We know that we work for a council that works really well. So it's reassuring to actually have that pointed out by our internal auditors. So again, as a scrutiny group, we are asked to just note that report and press the wrong button. So the recommendation is that the Government Scrutiny Group notes the internal audit's annual report in relation to 22-23, which is Appendix A. I'm sure we're all happy to note that. Yep, thank you. So moving on to the next item on the agenda is the annual fraud report.
Thank you. So this is our final paper. It looks slightly different to what our normal reports and previous ones look like. It's a unique paper that we do each year in June for the authority. What this does is it summarises a number of different things around the topic of fraud, how the authority have arrangements in place, and what kind of things have been identified. So what we're not doing in this report is actually testing. It's summarising the various sources of information that are in place and that we're aware of from the year. So the key things that I'll pick out that it notes here is that we haven't been made aware of, and the local authority haven't had any fraud cases to look into in the last 12 months. So obviously that helps support the position that there isn't significant fraud in place. I know we've delivered training in the past and as well alongside that as well, because it can sometimes be a concern to say, well, if there's no fraud, is that just because it's not being detected? Obviously we are skeptical of that in every review that we do, as I'm sure external audit colleagues and others are as well, but there's not been any reported frauds, which is good. There are a number of other elements. Obviously, the authority have policies and whistleblowing arrangements in place as well, and they're considered sound and robust. The authority engaged with a number of activities. One of the most key ones is the NFI, the National Fraud Initiative, where data is matched from a number of different sources and can identify potential matches or potential concerns, which the authority then investigate and look into, and that's summarised in the document. So, for example, I think in note 7.2 of the document, it shows that there are 800 matches there around single person discount for somebody receiving council tax. And one of the key risks is that when somebody turns 18, that household may have been eligible for single person discount, but once a dependent has turned 18, they wouldn't be entitled to that, and they may not have reported that change. The data matching can identify that, and the council started a proactive exercise around this in December to identify those early rather than reactively. And you can see from the number of cases that have been identified, there were 69 live cases, of which for 69 the discount was removed. So the process is working and has been implemented for the current year, which is positive to see. It goes on to do something similar with housing benefit as well. Obviously, we talked about no particular, there are no internal investigations of fraud. Obviously, processes around COVID grants, etc., ceased and ended. So that's not a material or significant matter for the last 12 months. And the report summarises, therefore, it's not a conclusion as such, but summarises from these various activities. We're content with obviously the fraud arrangements, and this summarises the fraud activity or lack of in the last 12 months. Yeah, I think that's everything to note on this particular report.
Okay. Any questions on the fraud report from anyone? No. So yeah, Councillor Thomas.
Just ask, how do we compare with other councils? So,
I'm happy to speak on this. This is a unique report. We don't necessarily do this for each other local authority. We don't tend to do fraud reports in this way. So Pete may have a view, but in general, the fact that there is a lack of fraud, and we do identify and actively work on particular fraud cases on other local authorities. And so because we can see the lack of that here, we've delivered training to this authority and they've engaged with that previously. And also with the NFI matches, particularly around single person discount, where they've been identified, have been cleared. There's very little there to critique, if you like. And so I'd like to think the authority would be ahead of others, because others are likely to either not have cleared NFI matches or have active and live fraud cases. So I can't say that with a scientific fact, but my general experience would be that the authority are in a good place.
in table 7.2, I don't think, perhaps I haven't understood it, but 800 cases have been identified and only 69 have been investigated. I just don't understand why so few have been investigated.
My understanding is, and Pete can, when the matches happen, effectively what they do is they're identifying a potential red flag. When someone has a look into that, it could quickly be dismissed or discounted to say, well, actually, no, that's not correct for whatever reason. For those that actually there is a potential concern here, they then turn into a live case. For all of those that have then turned into a live case, have then been the discount has then been removed. So it could throw up an anomaly that just really isn't one in the first place. What I'm not 100% certain of, and it may say it here, but I have to double check because my colleague did this, is if that's the case for the balance of the 700 or so. But as I understand that they're red flags, if they're not considered a concern, they don't turn into an investigation. Where they are, they've all been completed, but Pete may be able to highlight on that.
It just might be a bit more reassuring if there was another line that said number of cases looked at and not taken forward for investigation, because it looks as though only 69 of them were looked at, if you see what I mean.
Thank you. Mr. Linfield, do you want to?
Well, it's exactly as Gurpreet said, really. I mean, we can put in not case investigated and then leaves a balance, and then cases investigated but nothing, no further work required, and as a separate line, that's not a problem to put in. But just to confirm, we haven't received 800 and then just looked at 69, or no, that's not. So it'd be things that can be just like data errors, it could be spelling mistakes or something like that. It's something that can be quite trivial when you start going through that filtering mechanism until you get to the real issue. One other thing I was going to point out as well, going back to, I mean,
going back to, it is difficult to compare with other authorities because it depends if they're actually publishing the same sort of information. So, you know, the fact we are doesn't mean everyone else is. But you do, I mean, you will, when there are frauds, you'll know about it. I'm sure, you know, there's some that you would have seen in the press fairly recently. And the other thing is, in terms of where the big areas of fraud have been, it's all been on COVID and grants. And we've been doing lots of returns to government with you know, detailed information for them, and they've been checking and doing their own cross-checking, and we've not had any cases in relation to fraud in relation to any of the COVID grants.
Councillor Wheeler. Sorry, did you want to come back first, Councillor? If you want to come back first, Councillor Thomas.
I was just wondering why in 2020-21 there were so many more live cases investigated.
Are we?
I was just going to come back. Sorry, I'll come back on that one. Cyclically, they do single person discount reviews, and there is one planned for later this year, which will then pick up, and that you'll see that number increase in this year's numbers. We do single person discount reviews, and those reviews will then pick up, and that's where you'll see an increase in those numbers. So that year was probably a year where was probably the last review that we did on single person discount.
Do I understand, if I can say something, my understanding from the discussion is that what we're basically saying is that we're proactively looking to identify potential frauds ahead of the game by doing this. Is that basically? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Councillor Wheeler, you wanted to make a comment.
Thanks, Chairman. This is for the officers really, rather than for the gentleman across there. This is fraud, that's what the heading says. So if we've actually identified folk, household who are claiming single person when they shouldn't be claiming single persons, what broomstick do we use to hit them over the head with? To say you basically create a criminal offence here, or do we have anything problems claiming back? What would we do? Simply by way of the rates, that's all. Or is there any penal charge we can apply or do apply?
They do rebuild the council tax that's been identified as being overpaid. I have to check whether there are any criminal proceedings that are possible, but I do know that they do go back and rebuild.
But rebuilding, all that's doing means is they're actually spending, sorry, what they owe us. But is there any element of surcharge on that? Or in fact, creating
I've just come back up and just.
no, that's fine.
It's not always a fraudulent activity. It's sometimes an oversight, or whether not. It can be. Yeah.
Sorry, that's a challenge thing. Often it is that trying to determine is it a fraud as opposed to someone actually just making a mistake and not actually doing what they should have done. You know, someone who's turned 18, and then someone, you don't automatically then think, well, it's not natural. You know, it's not necessarily a deceitful act in that sense.
Councillor Gowland.
On that matter, I just wondered, do you have a sort of campaign of telling people who've got children of 18 that they have to do this? Because I guess a lot of people just pay their council tax by direct debit or whatever and don't think about it. Is there a publicity scheme to raise the matter?
On single person discount, we don't generally tend to write to all of the residents that have that discount on, because there's just so many of them. It's sort of like an annual, are you still entitled to it? And they claim.
You asked annually.
Well, we don't ask everybody annually that's got SPD, because there's just so many of them.
Okay. Any further questions? Okay, thanks. So again, I think, you know, it's generally a very a positive report. And just does show that we are looking ahead and trying to sort of make sure that we proactively look for these things. So again, the recommendation is that Government Scrutiny Group note the receipt of the annual of the fraud report. So everyone happy to note that. Councillor Sims.
Andy, can I just ask why we're asking to note on that? Surely we're here as a scrutiny group, and it should be councillors are asked to scrutinise and note. Surely that's That's what should be the question, not note every time, because we're not here just to nod our heads. We're here to scrutinise. So could you just answer that for me, please?
Well, my understanding would be that in this instance, it is a report. We've got we have the opportunity to question it. We can question it, and if we're not questioning it and raising matters, or if we're raising matters that then need to be minuted, then we would add that into the. We've noted it, but this is something that we've added. Is that a fair? I think that's a fair assumption. I think they are reports that. Yes, we are being asked to note them.
Can you turn it off, please, Andy?
You should be able to. I should be able to keep mine.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but we're a scrutiny group, and the way the question is worded or the way the recommendation is worded, whenever I do this professionally, I word the question. The group or the committee is asked to scrutinise and to accept recommendations made. It's not the group is there to accept recommendations made. We're here to scrutinise. That's what we're here to do. Not looking to cause trouble over it. It just needs to be worded differently, because we're not here just to nod our heads. We're here to scrutinise. And the scrutinise is going on, but within corporate governance is all about diligence and checks and accountability. So we really need to have the wording within the recommendation to scrutinise and to note. That's my only point for this new group, that moving on, that's what we're here to do. We're here to challenge and scrutinise. That's what this group is here for. It's corporate governance. It's so important that we do it right.
I think, Councillor Sims, absolutely agree with you. That's what we're here for. I think that's something you've obviously been on this committee for the last 4 years, I think. Has it always been a recommendation like that, or without going back through the records, are you saying that this is somehow different? And
it's something I've noted before with previous chairs, and I just wish it get noted and actually accepted that that's what we're here to do.
Yeah.
Well, because it gives new councillors the wrong idea on what we're here to do. So that's all I've got to put over on that. We are here to scrutinise, and it's not just to accept, it's here to challenge and scrutinise. That's how we continually improve as a council, rather than sitting on our laurels and we've got great reports and everything else, and isn't everything great? We want to make it better than great. And that's all I'm trying to say.
Okay, I think the point's made.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with what you've just said, so we can look at changing the wording.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you that we are here to scrutinise, and which is why I'm asking people to make comments and bring forward any comments that they've got that can be incorporated into it, because where we have a recommendation, we as a group can change that recommendation, and I think that's important to note, and I'll absolutely accept that. Okay, so I think that's the end of your presentation, so thank you very much. I'm sure you probably take your leave now. Okay, oh, you're on the subs bench, are you? Okay. Okay, so I'd just like to welcome Mark Surridge and Beth and Fred from Mazars. And the first item they're going to cover is the annual audit letter and value for money conclusions.
So I just want to say one thing. Ignore some of the wording in the recommendation.
Okay, over to Mark. You should be able to switch yours on.
Oh,
mine can stay on. Or you should be able to have two on at any one time.
Thank you. So, first of all, thank you for inviting us in. My name is Mark Surridge. I'm the key audit partner delivering your audit from now onwards. Just by way of introduction, I've been working in the public sector for nearly 20 years now. I'm Mazars UK sector lead for local government, and I am the responsible auditor for most of the councils across the East Midlands. And I'm just conscious of the fact that obviously we've got some new members in as well. So the first report is called the Auditor's Annual Report. Over the financial year ending 31st of March 2022, which I think when the previous report came to you before in maybe March time. And all it does is just draws all those things together. But it also adds something called the VFM commentary. What I'm trying to explain it is probably the worst worded kind of commentary there is, because you might rightly assume that we give a assessment on value for money. I'm afraid we don't. We give an assessment on underpinning arrangements such as policies, procedures, and the effectiveness of controls that, if they operate, we're just looking at the processes that sit underneath it. So what I would like to do is just take you briefly to page 78, 78 of your pack, if you're on a pack, which is page 4 of my report. I'm not sure which route you go through, and it's just section 1, the introduction. Bethan's going to come on to the plan for the current year in a moment, but it's just to reiterate that we have 4 broad areas of responsibility, covering the financial statements, the work that we do around value for money, wider responsibilities, but also something called the whole of government accounts. Just in case you've picked this up, we haven't finished that piece of work yet. That's because we're still waiting for the instructions that we need to do all of that. It's the same for every local authority in England. And until we get the instructions on what we need to do, we just can't do that. So that's just something that ticks over. It's fairly administrative in nature, but it's one of my responsibilities. I can't actually sign a piece of paper until we've done that piece of work. As soon as it comes through, we'll do that. In terms of the second piece that I would take you through is section 2, talks about the audit of the financial statements. I believe that was concluded earlier in March, and it's just a reiteration of work that would have come to this committee previously. The commentary on the VFM arrangement starts in section 3, and what I would do is I've got page 86, which is page 12 of our report, which is a table with some green on it, and that's probably the best thing that I draw your attention to. So our responsibilities sit under 3 reporting criteria, and they look at arrangements for financial sustainability, and that's things like the medium-term financial plan. What underpins the plan? How is it pulled together? What kind of judgments fall into it? The other area we look at is a broad theme of governance and informed decision making. So we look at things like risk management, budgetary control, how those are operating. And the last area that we look under is a mouthful, but it's improving economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. And that's essentially performance management arrangements, as well as working with key partnerships and whether there's partnership governance in place. We then go into a series of essentially what feels like rather negative comments, but essentially what we're looking for is, our arrangements adequate? We don't go beyond adequate. We don't get any better than adequate. We just go for adequate. And in doing that, we do an assessment of whether we think there is an area that would be so subjective or such high risk that we should delve further into it. So we'd really need to pull up the stones and have a look in a bit more detail. And if there was a problem, we would flag it as a risk of significant weakness, which is a terminology that we're required to use. It's essentially something that we need to look at. If there's a problem, it becomes an identified weakness. So you go from thinking about it to knowing there's something wrong. And when we do that, we issue a formal recommendation to the council to enact on. This table is all green, and that's on the basis that there were no actual significant weaknesses in place. So essentially, this is a clean report. The remainder of it goes through some of the areas, a summarised version of the work we've looked at and our findings across different areas. But also an important thing for me is the context of when this is written. Because we wrote this in around April time for the year ending 31st of March 2022. So you're talking 12 months past. And in that context, the world has changed. There's been significant issues around inflation, budget pressures, cost of pressure, all of those kind of things. So one of the things that's important for me is that we looked at the arrangements and we're satisfied they were appropriate. But that's not to say there aren't current issues that still need to be looked at and still need to be resolved, and that those will be informed as part of the work we're doing now. So it's really important for me that again, you take assurance from the work and the arrangements, but don't rest on your laurels and feel like everything's absolutely fine because you've got this report today. I will stop at that point and take any questions, because again, I appreciate having not been to this committee yet, I'm never 100% certain where to pitch it, but that's where I would pause for now.
Okay, any Councillor Birch?
Hi, thank you. My question's about the reserves. It strikes me there's some quite large cash reserves at this council. I'm just after a bit more clarity on the logic behind having such substantial reserves. Is that sort of meeting some best practice? Because to my mind, it does look a bit like it's being unproductive with, I think it's 14-15 million, somewhere in that region. And I'm just wondering why we're sitting on such large reserves. If you could explain a bit more about that, please.
So my responsibility around this is to make sure the council is financially sustainable and essentially is not going to go bust. That's where I stop. In terms of the reserve, in terms of your question, I'm going to throw this one over at Pete, really, because actually that's the basis of what you're asking.
Some more look on my face, and no, it's only joking. The first point where you should actually look is a bit of, if you like, bedtime reading, is look at our medium-term financial strategy, because that does focus on where our reserves are, what we're planning to spend. Because reserves are actually, it links to two things. It's linked to risk, and actually it's good that we have reserves, because if we didn't, you look at some of the councils that have got very low reserves, they're the ones who are in big trouble at the moment. So, but it's more linked to like future things like future capital plans and challenges like that, and other types of risk. So we'll have some specific earmark reserves. So if you look at the financial statements as well, you'll see the specific earmark reserves that cover certain particular types of risk. So there's a range of things. It's not an easy answer. I'm quite happy. In fact, we've got a budget session, planned training session in September. So I make sure perhaps spend a bit of time on that, and that would help a bit more. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Thomas.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, I haven't written down which page this was, but there was quite a lot about misclassification of items, and the sums were quite large, but I can't actually see it anymore, but that's what I wrote down as I was going through. I was just wondering if you could identify what I might have meant and shed any light on it. Thanks.
I think it's page 82 you're looking at.
Yeah, I think so. So as part of the work on the financial statements, I'll stick with page 82, which is page 8 of our report. Yes, yeah, I can see that. So as part of the work we did, and full detail is in what we call an audit completion report in financial statements, which is very, very long and very complicated. But the summary of this is, when we were looking at, when the team were looking at the testing and classification of assets in the financial statements, there was about £1.5 million worth of assets that were in the that were in, I believe they were in infrastructure assets, and they weren't infrastructure assets. They were overcounted, and they should have been written off years ago, I think. So essentially, the council hadn't been accounting for these resurfacing costs correctly, so they needed to make an adjustment in the accounts. In terms of impact, it's a large number, but underlying it, these kind of costs don't fall on the taxpayer. So whilst it's a big number, there's no burden on the taxpayer as a result of making these adjustments. It's an accounting adjustment that we identified and needed to be picked up. I think that was it. Yeah.
Does that answer the question, Councillor Thomas?
I might be a bit dense, but I didn't really understand.
Mr. Linfield, do you want to?
Well, I'll try and make it. I'll try and make it as easy as I can, because it is technical subjects. I'm sure you'll find as when you get to actually see the financial statements. But in essence, what it means is it's misclassification. So it's basically in our fixed assets balance. Say there's 90 million. There's 100 million in total, say in fixed assets, and you've got 90 million in say land and buildings, and 10 million in infrastructure assets. It's saying, well, actually, you shouldn't have had 90 million, you should have had 89 million, but and another 1 million in the infrastructure. So it's just a movement sort of between the categories, effectively. Yeah, in the wrong pigeonhole, effectively.
Okay. Any further questions on that? No.
We finished this item. Just
Well, if you want to bring something up, please bring it up. And you can put your microphone on.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get it. Practice this. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. It was just a table where there seemed to be an extra 4 million of government grant, which appeared.
I think that's.
But it's on page 19, and I wasn't sure whether we'd finished the item on. In the general fund, government grants 4,695,000 when it should actually be 695. Yeah, it's just a misprint. But we wouldn't mind the extra. Okay.
Yeah.
I think those grants are sort of COVID grants and extra additional government grants that we've had in that financial year.
All I'm saying is it should say 695, not 4695.
No, I think it's right. It's
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Right.
Okay. I'll just turn that.
Okay. Yeah.
So there is a typo in it. So I think that, and we are here to, as Councillor Sims says, we are here to point things like that out. So presumably that would be corrected.
Yeah, I presume you can issue one.
Sorry, can you put your microphone on?
We could send you another copy, but to be honest, I'm not minded to. I don't think it changes the substance of the report in any way.
We can obviously just put it in the minutes so it's been noted.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. No, we are here to ask questions, and we should certainly be pointing out if there's a typo and having that mentioned. So thank you. Okay, so that is, I think that does cover all of the annual audit letter and value for money conclusion. And notwithstanding Councillor Sims' comments earlier, we are asked to note that report, and obviously we'll minute the typo. So if everyone's prepared to note that report, yeah, thank you. And obviously the question that Councillor Birch raised hopefully will be covered in the budget workshops, so that you can begin to understand that a bit more. Okay, so moving on to the external audit annual plan, and back to Nazar's.
Just before you start that item, just like paragraph 4.1, it does say the 31st of August is the sign-off deadline. That should say the 30th of September.
Right.
Thank you. I'm Bethan and I'm the audit manager on Rushcliffe's external audit. So I'm just going to take you through our audit plan for the 22-23 audit. So section 1 summarises our responsibilities. As Mark said, we thought it was helpful to just sort of recap this, given there's a few new members and we're new here ourselves. But I won't go into too much detail because I'm conscious Mark has just gone through this and I don't want to be repeating. But it was just to reiterate that we're not just responsible for the audit opinion on the financial statements, but also the value for money and wider reporting arrangements such as the electors' rights and the WGA. And in relation to fraud, whilst we're not responsible for identifying fraud, it is part of our audit to make inquiries of management and internal audit. We review controls and just remain sceptical to fraud throughout our work. So section 3 details our audit scope, approach and timeline. If you look on page 114, this shows our expected timeline for the audit. The planning and risk assessment work has been started in March this year, and we're currently working with the council to finalise that. This year, as detailed in Appendix B, there's been a revision to one of the auditing standards, ISA 315, and this has required a big increase in the amount of work we've had to do at the planning and risk assessment stage, particularly around documenting the council's systems and controls and performing walkthroughs of those. And for that reason, that's why it's taken a little bit longer and we're still finalising that now. But as I said, we're working with the council this week to finish that and we're now moving on to the field work. The report details that we're expecting completion to be in October this year, but it's worth noting that these dates are just our current expected dates and then we'll be keeping them under review. We are reliant on third-party information to help us finish the reports. So, for example, on pensions, we have to get the assurance from the pension fund auditor before we can finish off the audit. So, depending on when we get that information, we'll have to keep these dates under review and obviously update. Section 4 details our significant risks for the audit. The 3 risks that we've identified as being significant are consistent with the prior year. And these are standard sector-wide risks, so there's nothing particularly unusual that we've noted for Rushcliffe. The one enhanced risk that we have raised this year relates to the insourcing of Streetwise. So in relation to that, we'll just need to address that risk by reviewing the proposed accounting treatment in terms of bringing those services back in-house and reassess our approach, particularly around income and expenditure. We might have to do a little bit more testing. Because the transactions relating to those services will now be sitting inside the council's accounts, whereas previously they were part of the subsidiaries accounts, which was out of our scope of audit. Section 5 details our value for money work, which I know Mark has just explained really well, but this just gives a little bit more detail on what that involves. So as Mark said, it centres around 3 criteria: financial sustainability, governance and improving economy efficiency and effectiveness. For 22-23, we're still in the planning and risk assessment phase for that work, and that will be ongoing throughout the audit. And then the final slide I wanted to highlight was Appendix B, which, as I mentioned before, is to ISA 315, and it just gives you a bit more background information around the fact that this requires a lot more work on the risk identification and assessment phase of the audit, and there's a greater emphasis on understanding the council's IT systems and processes and an increased focus on controls. So unless Mark has anything else to add, we're happy to take questions.
Okay, any questions that anyone would like to raise? Councillor Wheeler.
Hi, thank you very much. On Streetwise, since you focused on that, it's understandable when an entity is brought back in-house, and in fact what we're actually saying here, it was taken out of house a while back, it takes a while for that to filter through into consolidated accounts. Is that reasonable? So I don't think it's actually a criticism yet. What actually you're basically saying, you need to consider that when you're reading the accounts next time around. Did I understand that correctly?
So yeah, I believe the transaction enacted on the 1st of September of last 1st September 22. So you're going to get half of the year out of the council's accounts, half of the year in, and those are in the balance sheet and I&E account for the year that we are auditing. So we will be looking at those over the summer, this summer, and reporting it back to you shortly.
That's where it's coming from.
Yeah.
Okay. Any further comments from anyone? Did you want to add something?
Yeah. Sorry,
No.
Well, just to say that I suppose it's worth just commenting on the challenges of audit. I don't know if those of you that read the press, that's audit and accounting actually, there's challenges right across the sector. And myself and Mark, we have our own sort of private dialogue, shall we say, on on resourcing. There is an issue about the accounts themselves are actually supposed to be signed off by end of September, and that's what we aim for. So when in the programme, it's in the work programme, we've got the financial statements which are due in our September meeting now. I've been keep pressing Mark, and I think Mark, to be fair, Mark and the Mazars are having to struggle with their own resources. And I have to say there's a bit of a contradiction in a way, because unfortunately for external audit, they've got these given these extra pressures, if you like, in terms of the standards. So there's almost like there's not enough resource, but then they're having to do more work, and it's almost an inherent contradiction. My aim's always been to try and get the accounts done by September, and if we can't, we can't. But we'll see where we get to, and I know we've got a meeting later in a month's time with both Mark and Grant Thornton, who are the auditors of the pension funds and the county council. So because there is an issue there, and how they, I suppose, talk to each other. So that's the aim. I will say as well that there's some statistic that someone I know, sort of peer in the sector, has produced. There's only about 30% of district council accounts, I think, that have been signed off, something like that. And sorry, 30% that have been produced even to date by the due deadline for now. So we've already produced our accounts for 22-23, which are about to be audited. And that's not the case across the whole sector. There's quite a big backlog. There's just like over 500 sets of accounts across the sector that have got to be audited. And this is the challenge that external audit, and I'm an external auditor myself, so I do have some sympathy. I don't always come across as sympathetic to Mazars, but I do understand those challenges. I think it's worth noting that context.
So that what you're basically saying is, as you say, there's been quite a bit in the press recently about how far councils are behind with the auditing process. Yeah.
It's a challenging point around the sector. So I think a few things. It's going to take a while to come together. There is a multifaceted approach to trying to deal with this. So there's a new regulator that's involved, as well as the professional bodies and all the audit firms and representative of DLUC are involved as well to try and resolve this issue. And as we said, it's multifaceted. You take there's a transition year as well, so new entrants are coming into the marketplace. So we need to make sure that those councils are in a good state, so they can be handed over to a new audit and bring things back on track. It's going to take time. A real challenge, as Pete said, if only 30% of accounts have been prepared, well, we can't start an audit until the accounts are done. Again, for yourselves, we weren't able to sign off the opinion until March of this year, so that loses us a good 6 months of planning work that we just couldn't start 22-23 as a result. So to be able to catch up to September is nigh on impossible when you extrapolate that across 400 odd councils, because the situation is very, very similar, with resources that are in there and a level of coordination that requires the support from the pension fund auditor. The pension fund auditor is dealing with some rather fundamental issues where if your 21-22 accounts weren't signed off by 31st of March, so I think Rushcliffe just pipped the post on this one. Anything that wasn't signed by the 31st of March will now be delayed until at least the end of at least the end of September, because the pension funds numbers all changed. So there's been a whole raft of additional work on all of those councils that's been dropped in, which for audit firms, we then have to reprioritise, because we need to close off backlog to get back on track. It's hard. It's hard out there, but there is a concerted effort to get A, the right opinion, safe opinion, and B, getting it back on track. It's just going to take time.
Okay, any further questions? No. So again, the recommendation is that the scrutiny group accept the external audit annual plan. We're all happy to do that, yeah. Good. So that's end of your presentation. So thank you very much to our guests for presenting. And we'll be seeing more of you as time goes by. I take it as you, and welcome you to as new to the team. So if you wanted to take your leave, that's fine. And thank you for all of our guests. So this is where we've changed the agenda around. So the next item on the agenda is revision to the council's constitution.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. So this report summarises the proposed amendments to the council's constitutions, and as set out in the report, we are required to do this legally on an annual basis. The changes, as always, range from administrative amendments, so there are quite a lot of updates to make following this year's election, to changes that need to be made in response to changing policy and legislation, and then proposed changes to council procedures. And a full list of the proposed amendments is set out in Appendix 1 to the paper. Just to go through some of these, at paragraph 4 in the report, you'll see I've set out some of the proposed revisions. So at part 2, the changes made as a result of changes in council membership following the election, and to reflect appointments to various groups and committees as a result of that. At part 3, there are changes proposed to the circumstances in which applications must be considered by planning committee and the process for getting an application to planning committee. You'll see there's reference to something called certificates of compliance within the changes. These are new, and should the local development order be approved, then the certificate of compliance is similar to a reserved matter application in planning terms. So the new bullet point there just sets out the decision-making process around that. We have, however, amended this from what is set out in the table to incorporate some comments made by the Local Development Framework Group, and I've put a copy of the new proposed wording on everybody's desk, so you should all have a copy of that in front of you to consider. At part 4, we've introduced a procedure for dealing with alternative budget proposals. We've also made some amendments to the flowcharts around motions. When I say amendments, we haven't actually changed the procedure in any way. They've just been tidied up and made a bit more user-friendly, so hopefully a bit more easy to follow than what's currently in the Constitution. There are some further changes relating to planning committee in that section as well, so a proposed time change to 6 p.m, some revisions around the rules for who can speak at the committee and questions of those people, and also consultation. Part 5, there's reference now within the Councillor Code of Conduct to an obligation to behave in accordance with legal obligations and the council's policies. And then finally at part 6, there are updates to members' mileage rates to align with those paid to councillors. And the recommendation on this report, again, does say it asks you to consider, scrutinise, and recommend for adoption by council. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, so I certainly know there's going to be quite a few questions on this. So who would like to start? Councillor Calvert.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted, first of all, clarification on what the process is for approving the changes to the Constitution. Is it a case of us as a group recommending it to full council and that decision being made in a couple of weeks' time for this report?
Yes.
Okay, then I wanted to clarify what you say in paragraph 3.1 of the main report, which is that it's required to review it annually. Well, that differs from what's in the item to follow, which should have come before, where at the bottom of paragraph 2.3, you say the Constitution as a whole is reviewed when necessary and appropriate. The last review was July 2022, and a further review is planned in 2023. So I'm just saying that's different. But what's crucial, I think, is whether we can change the Constitution between Julys of each year. Can there be debates and recommendations for alterations to the Constitution at any time? So, right, yeah.
In reality, the Constitution is an ever-changing document. It's amended frequently. As monitoring officer, I can make sort of administrative amends that may be required without needing to bring it before yourselves or full council. But if we needed to make a change that was considered so fundamental that council needed to approve it between the annual reviews, we could do that. Yeah.
So in essence, if the changes that you put in here, if we all agree to that, that's fine. But if we want to make further changes, then that could be raised either at full council or
yeah. And this table is a result of changes that have been emailed to me over the course of the last year for inclusion in the next change. If something was considered so fundamental it couldn't wait, then yeah, we would do that.
And could you find that processes change and then they sort of retrospectively get incorporated into the check? Okay, thank you.
Does that? Yeah, up to speed with that. Councillor Thomas.
Yes, I'm afraid I had a list of questions which I have sent to officers, and I've got quite a lot of answers. So would you like me to run through the questions? Some of them needed discussion.
Yeah, no, I'm quite happy for you to, that's what we're here to do, so I'm quite happy for you to
rattle through these then.
Bring them up.
The first one was the format of the report. I thought it would be helpful when it goes off to council if there could be another column on it on Appendix 1 to explain why some of the changes have been made. Some of them may be obvious, but it's a lot easier to know, to look at the changes and decide whether or not you agree with them if you know why they were being made. So that was a suggestion, really, that the report could just include a short column that said reason, really.
And do people generally agree with that as a? So I think we can tick off the first, if you like, as we will minute that the scrutiny group have made that recommendation.
And the next one was the certificates of compliance, which is the one in front of you. Did you want to ask people if they agreed with that? Or did somebody go to speak to it? Because
has everyone had a chance to read the certificate of compliance and the proposed wording? And has anyone got a comment on it? Councillor Gowland.
It seems a bit complicated. I mean, basically it's saying we'll do our best to reach consensus, and then to go to planning committee. I feel that all the bits in the middle can be reduced to what I just said. It seems to be sort of tiptoeing around in some ways.
So I think it was clearer in the LDF meeting. It was because it was all in a sequence, really, and it's all been amalgamated into a paragraph here. So it might be easier if that those bullet points or lettering was included.
Okay.
The thing that's changed at LDF was the end point, where there was a vote, and LDF recommended that it ended up at planning committee, not with a decision by the director. I think.
So I'm slightly confused myself.
We're happy to look at how that sits.
Yeah.
Bullet points if that would help in terms of
because you're saying it's changed to
clearer.
LDF.
But this is the changed version.
And this is the changed version.
Yeah, so the original
And then-
version, which you've got in the table, didn't have applications going to planning committee. But LDF Group felt that that's where they should go to if we got to that situation where the consensus couldn't be agreed. It is wordy, it is fairly complicated.
And obviously we're talking here about the local development order. Areas covered by that. Councillor Wheeler.
Well, I was on the LGF group as well, so I'm aware of that. I think also what was originally recommended that the decisions were delegated to officers, if I remember correctly, rightly or wrongly, and that's a matter for discussion. The LDF decided that it should go to a planning committee if various stages of discussions fail to produce an outcome.
I think that's partly what happened there, isn't it? But I agree with what you're saying. It'd be better to have it in bullet form. I think you're agreeing on that anyway, aren't you? It'd be nicer to have it in bullet form rather than the format we've got in front of us. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. So the action is actually to just bullet point this to make sure that it reflects what was reported at the LDF. Councillor Birch, or
Am I right in thinking we are being asked to sign this off today, as written? Oh,
You're asked to comment and suggest alterations if you feel they're appropriate. And what I will then do is take it to full council and explain what suggestions were made at this group, and it would be for them to decide finally how it ends up.
thank you. So I just have one point to make regarding pages 38/39, paragraph 3.44. It reads, where a ward councillor refers an application to the planning committee, they must attend the committee to present their views. So that seems to be.
Can we just, because we're actually, I think we're still on.
Oh, I'm ahead.
Yeah, you're jumping ahead here, Councillor Birch.
Come back to me then.
but that's an important thing that we'll get to later. We've got that one. Yeah. So what we're on here is it's where we're talking about the local development order,
Right.
which is basically the power station, and how that's dealt with by, and that ward councillors should have some. Yeah, effectively, it's basically making sure that ward councillors have some form of referral to planning committee. Is that right? Yeah. And what we've agreed on this is that it should be bullet pointed. Yeah, and that's fine. Okay. Yeah.
The next one is 21-day limit.
Cass, can you put your microphone?
Yeah, the next one was the 21-day limit at 3.45, which basically says as a cut-off that you can't comment after 21 days, and it's quite often that there are delays for various reasons, and so I was hoping for some weasel words in there really, so that there was some method of in exceptional circumstances contacting the case officer or whatever to allow it to go over 21 days. Yeah.
Yeah, we've agreed some suggested wording around this, very much as Councillor Thomas has just suggested, really, that there will obviously be certain situations where it's impossible to comment within that timescale. What we want is something for members to be aiming for, and that's the norm. But if there are extenuating circumstances, to contact the officer and explain what those are. So we'll put some wording around that, if that's acceptable to this group, to reflect that.
Yeah. Does that satisfy everybody? That because I think if you go back to the reasons for this, it's we do as we're asked as ward councillors to make those comments within a timescale, but sometimes it's not always possible. But there was a time when people were literally coming in with comments at the last minute, which possibly was and if they were things that should have been covered within the 21 days, certainly. And
Thank you. Yeah, I think adding in some flexibility is fine, but as Councillor Redivine has just said, the scenario that we were experiencing at times is that we have a time scale to meet when we receive planning applications, and if we don't hit that target, we can ask for an extension of time. If the applicant doesn't provide that extension of time, then, and we haven't determined the application, they can go for non-determination, which means that we lose our control potentially over making the decision. So it can get taken out of our hands. So what was happening, so if an application needs to go to planning committee, the timescales are so narrow that 21 days is really important, that we receive notice as to whether it's going to be triggered to go to planning committee or not. Because we have a month lead in to planning committee basically to get things there. So that's really, so it's not to be it's not to sort of force you to look at something really, really quickly. It's for a very important reason, so that we can actually all have so that you can have your say and that we can consider it properly and work within the timescales, and we're not then put in a position where we're having to make a determination either without the information, or if it's suddenly triggered to go to planning committee, we've run out of time, and it puts us, it exposes the council then to not being able to make a decision on the application. So we can put in those words definitely for discretion, but not to lose or dilute the purpose of the clause in the first place.
So is everybody happy that that actually gives ward councillors enough flexibility that if something comes up that's material, then they can raise it outside of the 21 days? Because Councillor Gowan.
I suspect I'm planning committee's worst nightmare, but quite often I comment, but I'm not sure whether I want to object and then the planners come back. So I guess the question would be, is that within the 21 days, the initial discussion starting? Does that make sense? So it's actually a final decision you want to take in 21 days?
That's probably.
I think, as Leanne's explained, we are tight on our timescale. So within that 21 days, we would ask you to aim to get your final comments in. We appreciate that there are other things sort of at play in those circumstances, but it is crucial that we try and get them in within that 21 days, because as Leanne says, there are risks if we fail to hit our targets.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, but I think the key point is that yes, the 21 days is there, but if something comes up that is material, that wasn't information that didn't exist before, if you like, then a ward councillor can still bring it up, and I think that's important that we keep that. So is everybody happy that we progress that? Councillor Thomas.
It was in 3.45 again. Insisting that requiring councillor attendance if they've referred something to committee. And I think we've kind of agreed that should be should rather than must, if people are happy with that. Must is quite a very strong word, isn't it, really? And so should, it conveys the same, intent, really, but is a bit softer. And then the other thing is that you wouldn't always have to come to planning committee if there were 3 ward members and 3 of you have raised it. So to allow for the situation where 1 ward member is presenting the case, not all 3 of them. So a tweak, that says unless another ward member for the same ward presents the case in there as well. If people were happy with that, really. Otherwise, you're going to get all 3 of us from East League, or all 3 of them from Keyworth or whatever. Yeah. Every time that 3 of them have objected.
And I think in the past that's been almost self-explanatory. That you wouldn't expect 3 ward members to be there just because, even if all 3 have objected or whatever. So, Councillor Birch first, because
thank you. So on that point, I was just going to inquire as to what the logic was behind insisting that the people are actually present in the room, and I actually think we should go further than say change the word to should. Why can a written submission not be submitted? Why do they actually have to be present? What's the reasoning for that, please?
I thought we could. I must admit, I thought we could have a written submission, and I've made a submission by logging on and going online. Joining the meeting virtually before.
I think on the wider point, in terms of if the particular ward member is not available, that's fine if there's more than 1 member for that particular ward. If you've got single member wards, then obviously it's difficult for somebody else to come along and represent those views. You may have a ward that's got more than 1 members and their views different. So you may get somebody who's supporting the proposal, somebody who's against the proposal. And I think in those circumstances, particularly where there's 1 member wards, then it is built in there that in those kind of circumstances, various alternatives can be considered in terms of making those representations.
So what we're basically saying is that you, as a ward member, if you're in a single ward or any ward member, may make representations not without being physically there. So they could write and ask for their 5-minute statement to be read out by perhaps the chair. because that's happened in the past, I believe.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Is there provision for that already?
Yeah, it certainly has. We're not taking that provision out, are we?
No, that's still in there with the approval of the monitoring officer.
Yeah. And how about if, I've joined online before, is that still available?
That's one for the monitoring officer to decide on the circumstances at the time and what the reason is for a member not being able to attend.
Yeah.
So it is an option in exceptional circumstances.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Sims.
I'm really concerned about this. I represent a very large ward as a single member, with lots and lots and lots of planning applications going on. It's quite a wealthy ward. If I'm being compelled to go to a meeting in the day, as somebody who's self-employed and earns their money in the day, and you're compelling me to do that, I'd be less likely to make an objection, really, because I'm a human being and I'm thinking, right, I've got to go to this planning committee in the day, this planning committee in the day. When it used to be in the evening, it wasn't so bad. And I objected to it very strongly going in the day, but it got put in the day. So I really don't think that we should restrict it to you must or you should, or compelled. You may, and then there ought to be other options for me representing my ward. Do a written statement, like was said before, online, like was said before. But I don't think we should lose track that not all councillors are retired, and not all councillors can make it in the day. Some people have roofs to put over the families' heads.
So we have changed it, and we've established that those provisions are available to represent.
But it's got to be in writing, because at the moment it's saying. But at the moment we're saying the councillor must or should turn up at the meeting. So what is the governance around that, where I say I can't go? Well, it's in the Constitution. Because your Constitution are your tablets of stone.
Yeah, it's also in that same paragraph. It goes on to say at the end, circumstances prevent attendance, and agreement is obtained from the monitoring officer. So same as really what we were discussing before, you'd have that conversation about why you're prevented from doing that, and where appropriate we'd agree an alternative. I would just point out though that one of the next changes is the time of the meeting. So
Sorry, it's up to me to decide whether I'm coming to the meeting, not the monitoring officer. That's my point. I'm the councillor. I'm not an employed person that can be compelled. I'm an elected official. Yeah, it's down to me to decide, not an officer to decide what I do or give me the go ahead. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, Councillor. So actually, Councillor Gowland's been trying to get in.
I just want to totally agree. It's been moved to the evening, and I totally, absolutely agree with that, because for most working councillors, so that makes sense. But of course, there are councillors who work at night, and that point was made very loudly when it was moved to the afternoon. So we've had councillors previously who worked night shifts, working for the NHS. They couldn't have come to an evening council meeting. I don't see why it should be exceptional circumstances. We want to represent our wards. We want to come to planning committee if we want an opportunity to speak up for residents. If we can't come for a good reason, I don't see why we have to go through this hoop. Why can't we just put in a statement? I think every councillor who could come would want to come. It's like that's what we do. So I think it should be toned down. It should even say you can either put in a spoken statement or written statement. I'll be honest, this feels to me like an attempt to stop us putting in responses. That's what it feels like.
I have to say I didn't read it like that, because I've been in planning committee, and it's where we've had an application that's been brought by a ward member, and it's really annoying that they're not there actually to speak to it, and we're not necessarily given the reason why, and I appreciate there could be a good reason why. I think this can probably be my original suggestion was the expectation is that they would attend council, and there are already, unless there are exceptional circumstances preventing attendance, and an agreement is obtained from the council's monitoring officer. I think we would probably need to add something at the end of that, who could that said that the council's monitoring officer could suggest other methods of presenting at the meeting. Yeah, so that was.
Yeah. Do you want to come back
So,
first?
I'd just like to ask, does being at work count as an exceptional circumstance? I mean, I can imagine how it's been being at planning committee for the last 6 months, where you're getting all these cases which without any sort of proper background, but that's the situation we've ended up in. But I mean, is being at work exceptional? I don't think it is.
Do you want to make a comment?
Thank you. I think if we just sort of step back a bit from what we're trying to achieve here, is that it is the ward council. The reason the planning committee are looking at that application is because the single reason is because the ward council has triggered it to go to planning committee. So if it hadn't been triggered by the ward councillor, it wouldn't go to planning committee. It would be a delegated decision by officers. So there's something here about governance and reputation, and these reports are reviewed at planning committee in a public domain. And what we're saying is, if there's an objection, so an officer recommendation to approve a planning application, for example, if a ward council has objected to that, that would trigger planning committee. So to go to planning committee, we've got a situation where the planning officers are recommending approval, and the reason it's there for the objection is for the ward councillor and for their reasons alone. So what we're trying to say is to make it a balanced and reasonable and democratic process, to show that due consideration is being given. If there's a real objection there, we're trying to suggest that by presenting that verbally, it gives the best balance to that argument for the members to consider the other side of the argument, because you've got verbal presenters promoting for, and then a written statement raising the objections, and that can sometimes be unbalanced. And what we go on to make further changes is that planning committee can ask questions of that ward councillor if there's anything that's not clear, or a further question that's raised, which that wouldn't be an opportunity if it's a written statement. But what we're absolutely not saying is you have to be in person or else you can't make representation. What we're saying is we're trying to encourage you to make that a fair balance, because if an objection has been made, that's the only reason the report is at planning committee in the first place, is because of an objection has been made by the ward councillor, and it's about that public perception, and for the developer as well, or applicant or homeowner who's seen that there's not a balanced representation, and it's about making sure that we've got the correct appearance as well for how these applications are determined.
Can I try and summarise that? I think what we're basically saying is, as councillors, and certainly if I as a ward councillor put something, objected and it went to planning committee, I would expect to go to that planning committee. Where I've not been able to go to that planning committee, I've made representations in other ways, whether it's been a written statement or actually going online and addressing the committee virtually. I think what we're saying as a scrutiny group here is that we really don't like the wording of this and the way it comes across. I think you've got Councillor Thomas basically saying that obviously as a planning committee member, how frustrating it is if you've got someone who's made an objection and hasn't turned up. And I can certainly think of an example probably about 4 or 5 years ago where a ward member made an objection, and the idea that he wouldn't then speak about that objection just didn't make sense, basically. So I do get that, but I think basically that there's a fundamental issue here with the wording. Does that summarise what we're basically saying?
Sorry, is that the revised wording or the original wording? Because we've already said we're going to
I think probably even with the revised wording, it's still, I think it just needs to be made clear that a ward member, it's almost like the ward member should make representation. Yeah, whether that's in person or whether that's through a written statement or another way, they should have that ability. Does that?
Can I just say, again, as a single councillor in a large spread out ward, I don't live in all the villages that I represent because it would be impossible. Yeah. So I go to those villages, to the committees, to the parish councils and listen to what they say about applications, because it's not my opinion that I'm representing, it's my parishioners' opinion that I'm representing. When I go out and see people that have got extensions and things, I'll listen to all that's involved, the neighbours, you know, if they've got complaints and things. It's not about me. I represent them, and I then make a judgment whether I can object or whether I can't object. But often the best person to represent that opinion is the person that's given me the opinion. I'm just the conduit to give that opinion and to say, no, this needs to go to planning committee. Now, if I am compelled in many ways to seek approval from officers to go to planning committee, as the chair of standards, I don't want to be up in front of my own committee for not complying to the handcuffs that are being given to me for representing my community, my parishioners. And that's what I'm elected to do. I'm elected to represent them, not give my opinion, give their opinion.
Gemma, do you want to comment? Because I think Leanna's made the valid point. Are we? How far away is the revised wording from what would be acceptable? Because I think the comments being made are fair.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, these changes that I'm presenting to you, the Constitution is a document that is owned as a whole by me as the monitoring officer. The changes proposed have come from various different departments. So all the planning changes are proposed to you by your planners. So I think we'd have to look at some revised, but I'm not the person to suggest to you what's going to work here, because this is to do with how planning committee works, if that makes sense. The only thing I can think to suggest is we've got we had some original wording from Councillor Thomas, where you'd said the expectation is that they attend committee, which waters it down further. Other than that, you know, you've got exceptional circumstances. Did we just go with where certain circumstances, or where circumstances encouraged to attend committee? Again, I feel it's for the planners really to have this conversation rather than me.
Can we just take this in order? So the first hand I saw that was Councillor Calvert.
I would just say you could possibly put should make representations, which is something you were alluding to, Chair, preferably in person.
With that, you're not.
Is encouraged to, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the compulsion bit that's obviously the issue. But at the same time, if I was making that representation on behalf of someone, yeah, I would like to think that I would put something towards the planning committee, whether it's in person or otherwise. If I've facilitated it going to the planning committee, if you like. Councillor Regan first, and then Birch, and then yourself. Yeah.
Can I say isn't it, rather than going back and forth over specific wording, why don't we look at what the objective is as the representation in the planning committee, and see if there's rather than forcing an individual or encouraging an individual to attend, is there a different framework that we can use and then describe, which could include or exclude attendance, but capture what it is the planning officers need in order to get the job done, so the council can run efficiently.
I think in terms of attendance, it's not what the planning officers need, it's what the committee needs. It's having that person representing their views or their constituents' views to the planning committee. And later down the list in the table, it has been considered or put forward that we change the format in that objectors speak and then members of the planning committee have the opportunity to question those. We've done it once and it was very beneficial. The objectors speak, the applicant speaks, and then members have the ability to question those to clarify any points that have been raised or any concerns that members may have. And it was also raised by Councillor Thomas, is there an option or an opportunity for the ward member to be questioned? If that gets accepted, the ward member is not there, they're only writing a submission, then clearly that opportunity is taken away. So they may not be questioned on something that members want clarity on.
So, for example, couldn't the submission be reviewed prior to the planning committee, and then questions come back? Can you, if the wording isn't?
I don't think you can do that. But I think at the end of the day, that's then the ward member's decision. Or they put a submission, they can't be questioned on it because they're not there in person. That's their decision. And it may, for whatever reason. And I think that's, if that's detrimental to the ward member's argument, then so be it. Sorry, did you, Councillor Birch, did you? Yeah.
Thank you. So just to sort of bring this all together. So the issue seems to be the language here. So again, just to summarise the position I hold here, I think the language is too strong, and it is compelling people to attend. It is penalising people who work and people with younger families, and is more beneficial to a certain demographic than others, I feel. So I think it needs to be changed for that reason. And I would make the point that the information, if you're objecting to a planning application, the information is the same in your objection, whether it's spoken or written. So I appreciate you can't then have a dialogue in the room, but I think it should just be written in a better way, just to make clear that a written submission is just as valid. Because the way I'm reading this, I agree with Councillor Gowland. Exceptional circumstances to me is granny's just died and you can't come. It's not you're at work or you're putting your daughter in the bath and you're looking after your kids, but they are the real things that certain councillors have to do at 6 o'clock on the planning committee meeting. So in this meeting, can we move that the language, do we need to do it in that format to make a motion, or shall we suggest some new wording, or?
Councillor Thomas shut her hand up. And then, right.
Could I propose that the officers take away the discussion and the views and come up with a form of wording that then goes to council?
Councillor Gowland.
Yeah, can I just say, I heard what you said, and I think there is a point there, and I still stand by everything I've said, but I do think that's, picking up Councillor Regan's point, encapsulating that in the comments, that it is to give parity to the residents on behalf of whom the complaint has been, the objection has been made. That's what we're trying to capture, I think, isn't it? So I think that's fair, and I think that should be captured in it. But nonetheless, with all the providers we've said.
Right. So are we all happy that it's quite clear that the wording as it stands at the moment isn't what we would find acceptable? We have to come up with some form of wording. Gemma obviously has listened to our debate, and I think if that, obviously we won't get a chance to scrutinise it again, but it will go to full council in a format. Is that acceptable to? Is that acceptable to everybody? Yeah.
Well, why don't we just suggest some wording now and then get it into the board, and
because I think it's I think honestly, Councillor Birch, I think that would be an impossible task because there's so many, we have. I think we've made our views quite clear, which is what we're here for, and it needs to come back in a different format. And if it's not a format that we find acceptable, then I'm sure there'll be some debate about it at the full council. Okay.
Shall I go back to my list?
Yeah, please.
Very good. Okay. Paragraphs 4.20 and 4.21 seem to imply that the planning committee can go on forever. It does say that no new business can be considered after 9 p.m. But with the other committees, there's some sort of cut-off. Yeah, so I think it needs some sort of words in there to actually to say that the meeting will finish at 10:30 or whatever it is. Just not starting an item until after 9 is not enough to make sure we're not sitting there at 12 o'clock at night, basically. All the other committees have got cut-off times. The planning committee hasn't, the way it's written at the moment. Pardon?
Councillor Sims.
Can I just say that surely planning committee should have a cut-off time for the health, safety and welfare of members, really, and officers. Officers will have a long day on that day. It's been if they're going home at 10:30 and they have an accident, then the authority is liable.
I think Councillor Thomas's point as well here is that the whole point of moving times of planning committee, etc., was to prevent them starting earlier than 7, was to prevent us going on till 12 o'clock, which has been known. And I think again, it's a very valid point that the way it's currently worded, effectively, we don't know that if something started at 9 o'clock, that might be a 2-hour debate. And it has been known for planning applications to take that long. But equally, so I think again, there must be some form of cut-off. Is that Councillor Sims?
Can I suggest in the courts we have part heard cases if it runs over? So maybe we could follow the same principle as part heard cases, and take it over into the next committee. So long as the next committee, it must have all the same members. That's the only in court that it has to have the same panel going back, the same bench going back. So that would cause an issue, but it would help this along, and it is a recognised process.
Can I just raise a couple of issues about having a cut-off time? I think I'll start with the format of the meeting, and what we will do as officers, we'll try and structure the meeting so the more important things are dealt with first. The ones that are likely to take a long time and could be complicated and detailed, we'll try and structure that. We will look at report lengths. We'll try and reduce them because they are quite long. The risks of having a cut-off time is we may not conclude all the business, which then opens us to risks, again, in terms of our performance, the risk of having to pay fees back. So there are a lot of risk around it. And one of the main ones would be, and you've mentioned it already, is potentially the quality of the final decision. If members have been here and officers have been here a long time debating something, they may want to rush it to get it finished before that deadline, that cut-off time. And I think that is a real risk. And then it's the quality of the decision. And we do get monitored on the quality of decisions.
But that confirms my case that if you go part heard, you can then convene a special planning committee if necessary to complete the proceedings. That's what we do in court. If it's part heard, if we've got a trial going on and it comes to a cut-off time, it's cut off and the bench agrees to come back at a certain time to hear that within a short period of time. And that's what happens. So that's a public sector organisation, just like this is. So why can it not happen with that due process?
Can I just make the point that this particular change to the Constitution isn't something that's been suggested by officers? So this is what has been proposed. It's entirely within your remit to suggest that that's not what you feel we should go with as a group, and we will put that to council.
I think, again, I'm not sure about the cut-off point, Councillor Sims, because planning is not a court. It's not a court. It's quasi-judicial. A court is
Judicial. Judicial.
but quasi-judicial, and it's. Well, I'm not sure of the practicality of it, but I'm also not. You know, I think it's quite clear that you can't have a. Yeah, could you have something where the planning committee chairman can decide at what point that, because he'll have a view on if that next application should start or not and how long it would take. Is that a more acceptable way of saying it than there is, you know, nothing can start after 9 o'clock? Because if at 8:59 you start something that goes on for 2 hours, I wouldn't want to be on that planning committee.
We can propose that as part of the changes should be proposed to council.
So it should be down to the chairman to decide at which point the business should be ended for the day.
I think that's a good point. Again, in court, the presiding justice will decide if they listen to another case or not, whether it's going to go on. So it's just the same again.
So rather than putting a time in, it's down to the chair effectively to limit the time of the meeting based on what's in front of him. Does everyone agree with that? Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, carry on.
They should be. I'm joking.
Okay. So there's one.
Time's arriving.
Yes.
Page 93, paragraph 93 and 94 are all about speakers of planning committee, and that the order is different in both of them. And so I was asking if the intention was to change the order. At the moment it goes applicant, objector, board member, which is what it says in one of those paragraphs, but the other paragraph has got it the other way around. But then it's been explained to me that one is about who can speak and the other is about the order of speakers. So my proposal would be that we leave the order of speakers the same as it is at present, and that the paragraph that lists them in the order that they are speakers, because otherwise it's confusing.
One of us seems to be nodding in agreement.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I just bring up a different matter? And I hope this wasn't the next thing on your question, on your list. But this issue of planning committee asking questions of the different speakers, which at face value seems like a great idea. I just wonder in practice whether it could have two problems. First of all, I suspect it might make things a lot longer. And secondly, I just wonder whether there's a risk of objectors or either way, particular objectors, I guess, being particularly intimidated by that process. So I just wonder whether the questions might be through the chair or something like that to limit the number of questions and to make it a more controlled process.
I think as with everything, the final decision rests with the chair. So I think in terms of the number of questions and the length of questions, it would entirely be on the chair to call a halt to that. If we got to the point where, you know, it's been going on for a long time, there needs to be that control there over the process. And if you want us to advise that the questions are asked by the chair, then I don't see a problem.
I feel that might be just a more controlled process for people who might be very unused to this situation. But I don't know what the rest of the committee think.
Yeah, I think that's, but yeah, everyone else agree that that should be the case.
So, Councillor Gavin didn't actually steal my next question, which was,
That's all right.
why can the committee not ask questions of the ward members? So as drafted, it's got committee asking questions of the applicant and the objector, but not the ward member. And if the speakers are being asked questions, I think the ward member ought to be asked questions too.
Yes, Councillor Sims.
Again, I'll reiterate it. I often object for other people, not me. So the best people to be quizzed are the people that have objected, not the messenger. You shouldn't shoot the messenger because the messenger might not have the information that you've got or you require, which could then jeopardise the objection illegitimately, really, because it would water down the people that are objecting because their ward member isn't so up to speed with that objection as what they are.
I would say if you're not up to speed with the objection, you shouldn't have objected, basically.
Again, you're not listening to me. I represent my ward. I represent the people of my ward. I don't live in every village. So how can I have that knowledge like I'd have of a next door neighbour's extension? I can't. So it would be arrogant of me to know what their objections are in detail, other than lots of talking that goes on before I make that decision to object on their behalf. I represent them, not me.
I think Councillor Sims, I think what we, how do I put this? What we're, I think surely though, if the ward member has made a comment, so there's times when I'll put a comment in on a planning application either for or against it, and it will be based, it might be based on parish council meetings, it might be based on representations from other people, but I still have to if I then go and present to the planning committee, I'm more than happy to be asked questions. And
but what Councillor Thomas is saying, that committee have the right to quiz the ward member.
Yeah,
not the ward member present, but have the right to quiz and scrutinise the ward member. And the ward member will not have that level of knowledge that people who are affected by that application will have. That ward member is elected to represent the people that it is elected them. It's there to be the conduit to the council. No different to if there's fly tipping going on. The ward member isn't going to supervise the fly tipping or take it away. If people are complaining and they go to the ward member goes to the council. It's that conduit from the people to the council, and then the ward member then says, "Okay, you need to get a grip of this because this is." So it's no different. I'm not going clearing up the mess, you know, and I'm not there. I'm not affected by the mess. I'm representing the people who have the mess.
So, but in this instance, when you make an objection, you would then have a dialogue. If you were objecting because it's what you've been asked to do, you would then have a dialogue with the planning officers at some stage, whether it reaches committee or not, as to what your material objections are. If you then make a representation, submit some sort of representation, then obviously if you're not there in person you can't be questioned, but if you're there in person, I don't see the problem with being questioned, because if you're going to make a representation to the planning committee, it's going to be on material planning grounds.
Well, I do.
Yeah,
I see the problem with that. I don't believe that all ward members should be cross-examined by committee.
Councillor Gowland.
I'd actually, this is going to be a no, I know, but I'd like to make the opposite point actually. As a ward member, I've sometimes sat in planning committee unable to speak on a case when things that are patently false have been said about my ward. And I would have really welcomed the opportunity. It's like you're sitting on your hands and you can't say anything. It's so irritating. And I would have really welcomed the opportunity to be able to put my hand up and speak. So I'm not quite sure. Clearly, ward members can't vote, but I'm not quite sure why ward members can't speak on the cases subsequent to having made their case. Because what happens is you say something, you make this statement, then you have to sit and listen to people saying things, as I say, which can be false. And there's nothing to do about it. Now, I know why at one point ward members were taken out of the process, but I would have thought again, maybe through the chair, a simple, correction of facts would be a good thing.
I think surely they are two separate things.
Yeah,
they are two separate things, and what we are looking at here, surely, But actually, if I, as a ward member, had made a presentation to the planning committee, yeah, I know it's frustrating, and I would have no problems, with the planning committee asking me questions on my presentation to them as to the reasons I'm objecting and the material reasons I'm giving them. If it helped clarify in their mind why I was objecting, and they wanted to ask me a question, I wouldn't have a problem with it. Councillor Birch.
Yeah, just real quickly, I agree with Councillor Thomas, and I hear what you're saying, but I think on balance, there's a net benefit to asking the councillor. And I appreciate what you're saying about not knowing all the minutiae, but I think overall, if you've got the facility to ask them, more often than not, that'd be more beneficial than not. So I think it's probably a good idea in my view.
And I think it's clear that the questions should be solely addressed on what it is you've presented to the planning committee. That's the point. So if you're going to present something to the planning committee and they want clarification, at the moment you can't give that. So, yeah, Councillor Wheeler, and then Councillor.
I agree with you, but probably for slightly different reasons. You as ward council, you've made your presentation, you've had discussion, dialogue with the officer. The facts are all there. You made your presentation, you've rolled it out to the committee. The committee will have a discussion amongst themselves before they come to a decision. I don't think the ward member should be cross-examined. I agree with you, slightly different reasons, but outcome's the same.
Councillor Calvert.
As a member of planning committee, I can assure you that I certainly wouldn't cross-examine the ward councillor. I would fully understand what you've said, that the people who've objected know all the detail, and there'd be no expectation that you would know all that kind of detail either. I can't vouch for all the other members of planning committee because I've only been to one meeting, but I would imagine they would have a very similar.
So I'm not really quite sure where we go with this one, in as much as the proposal from Councillor Thomas is that we incorporate that ward members, if they make a presentation, can be questioned on it, but they're questions about the presentation. They're not questions about anything other than the presentation. Do we try and take a vote on this as to who would be in favour of ward members being questioned or not? Sorry.
Again, what we can do is to make it clear when we report back to council that there was a difference of opinion on this one.
Yeah.
This is something that's been proposed. I think, again, it's potentially one for the chair. If it strays into what feels like cross-examination, then the chair can say, hang on just 1 second, that's not what we're here for. It's more around points of clarification, I think, of what a ward member has said. It's not trying to catch them out, or that's the point of the proposed amendment, I think, by Councillor Thomas.
Yes, I think quite often, you've delivered your piece basically, and then they go off and start discussing it, and they say, "Oh, did she mean this and did she mean that?" Well, whereas if they had a chance to ask me, I would have been able to say it. But I do take your point actually that if you're bringing something on behalf of somebody else and you're reading it, however much homework you've done, you might feel unsure about it. But then perhaps some sort of way of people, if it says the ward member, if willing, goes cross-examined or something.
Well, it's not cross-examination. It's clarification of what you're presenting to the planning committee.
Yeah, questions may be asked of the ward member if willing or something. I mean, and the same for the applicant and the objector, and that could go in all three of them. At the moment, it says, what does it say? Questions would be asked, can be asked. Questions can be asked of the applicant. And then the second stage is questions asked of the applicant if willing, if appropriate or something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Just going back to the wording. We have actually proposed seeking clarity. I mean, this is around the objector, so seeking clarity from objector or their representative. So it is just all around. You said this, did you mean? Rather than a cross-examination. But again, I take your point that it's got to be whoever's come along. It's quite nerve-wracking sometimes even to speak in front of committee, so to then be expected to answer questions. Potentially, perhaps it is something you want to think about, that suggested wording around if accepting. I don't know.
So, sorry, Gemma, the conclusion that you?
I think we conclude that there was a discussion around this point and there were some differences of opinion, and we'll just perhaps make it clear what the concerns were, and it's for full council to make a decision as to how they want to proceed with that.
Okay. Councillor
Sorry, but so then I appreciate my point was different, but I do think it's linked, because if the ward councillor can be questioned, I do think it would be appropriate for the ward councillor to make a point of clarification during the discussion, you know, not join in the discussion, but just make a point of clarification.
Councillor Wheeler.
That's the same thing in that case, would go Gemma's report be for full council to decide whether that's acceptable or not. So it follows on the same reasoning. Not anyway to see what you're saying. No, I'm not.
But I was trying to get parity between the appearance of the others and the ward member. That's why I suggested that go in for the ward member as well. So that would have to be for the others as well.
I think it's a bit different. Ward member knows ward and then Charles.
Well, it would destroy the reason I was doing it, but either way, yeah.
Okay, so I think we can move on from that. Yes.
I've got another 2 pages, and I don't.
How many things? How many more have you got, Gareth?
I don't know. I think.
Because
I want to carry on. Or? Actually, that one's all gone, isn't it? So not very many.
Because we've got so much
to
get through. Is there anything absolutely burning? Because I was hoping that some of the questions you'd raised have been answered.
Some of them have been answered, but there's 1 or 2 that says, you know, if the committee thinks that is, we can take it forward. So, it's just I think we ought to do other business. And I can take it forward with the officer, and they can come to council, and if people object to them,
and I think that was the point that Gemma was trying to, from all the questions you raised, her answers were trying to get to that stage. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, just a suggestion, not just for Tom, other councillors come to the meeting, have lots of questions. It would be quite useful for us to see them in advance, so we can actually see what's been said, digested, form of view. Of course, it will be discussed, but it won't be discussed cold. It would be, we'd have had a sight of it beforehand.
Yeah.
That would help, in my opinion.
Okay.
So can I just clarify then? So because I actually had some other points, so I'd send my points to Gemma and this discussion will go on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I think so. Okay, so in which case we can move on to the annual government statement.
Gemma.
Okay.
Thanks.
I think we've gone past the cut-off for this particular meeting. Anyways, so annual governance statement. So it is page 1. 139.
Yeah, going to get backwards now.
Yeah, 139. Right, so I'm not going to go through it. You're pleased to know I'm not going to do a page by page review of this. Now, someone ready? Yeah. Okay. So this is the annual governance statement is something we have to do every year, and it accompanies the statement of accounts. It follows best practice in terms of SITFA and Solace's framework and guidance, which is delivering good governance in local government, but also it's within the accounts and audit regulations 2015. So obviously having good governance particularly critical, given everyone's seen all the various section 114 notices being issued at different authorities and that type of thing. So it is quite vital that we do have good governance. Hence this group, and it's important this group is asking the questions, isn't just being, if you like, self-congratulatory as it might come across, but it isn't that intention. But the governance statement itself is really a reflection of two things. It's a reflection of current governance arrangements, but it also the more probably perhaps more interesting part I should say is probably section 4, which is where it talks about more what are some of the current governance issues that we face, and I'll probably talk more about those. So it is signed off by the leader and the chief executive, so they've already had sight of this. They're happy with this as it stands at the moment. But because it does go with a statement of account, so if something was significant was to happen, say between now and whenever the statement of accounts gets approved, say September, October time, then it potentially can change, but it will be brought back to the group in any case when we bring the statement of accounts in October, or that'll be probably the November group meeting that those will come. So if you look to Appendix 1, so that's where so that's on page 143. So this is the same. We use basically the same format every year, because I say it isn't. We do follow the sort of recommended practice, and so you've got various principles within the actual guidance, ITFA's guidance. There's various principles. So in a box you'll see like the first one is at the bottom of page 143. That says principles C and D, and it talks about. So they're the overriding principles. And then below that we've got the various detail. And as I say, I'm not going to go through everything, but it covers things like the things that you'd expect in terms of having a good grounding in governance at Rushcliffe, the sort of things you'd expect to see, like about the constitution, the council's policies, its procedures, risk management. So we've got all, those of you that have been to the group before, you've seen our risk management strategy, you've seen our policies, the register for risk management. So that's something you're going to be looking forward to seeing in probably one of the next meetings. And then also things like development and training. It's important that we develop and keep training the staff so everyone's up to date with, including councillors, up to speed with things. And then other things like the roles of council cabinet, scrutiny groups, and internal and external audits. That's, if you like, you broad the main things you'd expect to see when you're looking at governance, and it talks space. It gives you a walkthrough of how it applies to Rushcliffe. I'll say section 4 is probably the more interesting bit. So I'll just quickly go to that. Okay. Yeah, so on page, well, it starts on page 152. That's where the section starts, and it's got some of the things you'd expect to see. It starts off, talks about COVID and some of the issues that might have happened since. I mean, thankfully COVID's gone, but there's still, if you like, a bit of legacy in terms of how that did impact on certain projects. It talks about the cost of living crisis and its impact. There's other issues that are mentioned, such as the Freeport and Development Corporation. In actual fact, hopefully those of you that are new councillors, it gives you quite a good sort of background into some of the issues that the council's facing. If you wanted a quick summary of some of the key things that we're facing, then it's in this document. And then there's some of the bigger financial risks. So I mentioned that in the budget training session, but those of you that have been to the budget sessions before, where we talk about some of the risks surrounding business rates, new homes bonus, fair funding. So fair funding is a review of the budgets, which the government's been threatening for about the last 3 or 4 years, and it keeps getting put off. But there's all those sorts of things. And then other things, or the main other issues that affect us going forward, it's a bit of horizon scanning as well. So like the forthcoming legislative changes in relation to the environment, planning, levelling up. Those are the sort of the big, so it's talking about really the big things that are going to be affecting the council. And then after identifying all those key issues, we've got an action plan and how we report on those particular risks and opportunities in relation to addressing some of these issues over either the coming months or indeed the coming years, because some of the things are stretching out a lot further. So that's basically what the document's all about. And what I'd ordinarily be saying to you all is, does this sort of feel like, does it cover the things that you expect to see? Which hopefully it does. It's more difficult, I think, because obviously you're particularly the newer councillors. Once you've been here at least a year, you'll have got a better feel for what is going on and all the major issues. But hopefully it does. It is fair. There's still a lot of information in there. Though we try and make it as succinct as possible. But anyway, so that's it. And as I say, it is a draft at the moment. It's really for you to. If you've got any comments on it, I don't know what if the recommendation says note it or something, but
I'm sure it does. Go and find the recommendation.
Right.
Yeah, Councillor.
Thanks for that.
yeah, sorry.
What's the statement trying to do? Is it trying to tell us what's happened and what we've done, or what we want to do, or both? And there's very little information in it that is telling us what you've done or what we've done as a council in the last year, because it's a statement. An annual governance statement is a statement to tell everybody what we've achieved in the last year. It doesn't really get it for me, having done a lot of annual governance statements myself. It doesn't hit it. I don't want to be overcritical of it, but it's a very almost off the shelf annual governance statement rather than specific to this organisation. And it doesn't feel to me like a living document. So I want to know what we've done as a council, what we've achieved in the last year annually, what we're looking to achieve, and that's what is the expectation of an annual governance statement in the public sector.
Just to be clear, it's not that sort of thing. What we've achieved on what you're talking about is more than what's our annual report. That's not. This is about governance. This is governance, and it's just about the framework. And this ticks all. Yeah, but this ticks all the boxes. Trust me. In terms of what our requirements are, the requirements that sit for demand offers. It focuses on what the structure is. It talks a bit about some of the things that have gone on. It talks about budget position and those sorts of things. And it talks about the major issues, I suppose major risks that are facing the council. What it isn't is an annual report which talks about we've done X, Y, and Z in terms of performance. Because if you want to look at that, you can look at that in the statement of accounts, look at the forward, and this sits with that. That's all in there. That is more the annual report type thing that you're talking about.
Councillor Thomas.
Thank you. I'm not really familiar with what the report is for, but I've got a question arising from what's on page 155, which is, and it's also on another page, I think, about the power station and the financial situations and projections surrounding that, really. And it's, the power station, the DevCo and the Freeport. So is there a separate evaluation of the kind of financial trends or predictions for arising from that anywhere? Is that separated out? Because presumably the business rates will be predicted in some way, but that will be under the business rates line, and planning application income will be under the planning application income line. And I was just wondering if those are all brought together in one report that reflects how we're thinking the financial outturn is going to be from that project. Do you see what I'm asking? Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I mean, obviously, this report, this is talking about, obviously, clearly there are risks with the Freeport. There will be, hopefully there's going to be the business rates growth. So within the, if you like, the Freeport business case, which is separate, and then so we do. That's why it talks about separate reports on the Freeport and DevCo. Within those reports, that's where you'd find those things. And you're right. If you remember when we spoke about Freeport, we spoke about the position of no detriment. So the idea is that we don't lose out on business rates. So when we've taken a fairly neutral position on business rates going forward, and it's quite difficult to predict what those business rates. Obviously, there are projections, but there's so many issues with the Freeport. There's quite a lot of risk around it, and that's why it's in here as a particular level of risk. But specifically about what those the financial issues with the Freeport, that'll be covered in separate Freeport reports.
Yeah.
I did actually find it to be a Rushcliffe specific document, but I did think that maybe there should be something about emergency planning for flooding wildfires and pandemics, given what's been said recently about the risk of future pandemics. You know, that obviously that's big, that, well, yeah, that. Thanks.
Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, well, I could look at adding that. I'll talk to Dave Banks, who deals with emergency planning. I'll have a word with him about
Thank you.
looking at that. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, Councillor Galvin.
Not a question, but a statement there. In the section on partnerships, it ends up referring to the devolution deal, and at the very end it says that the current proposals would still mean that Rushcliffe as a borough will retain its sovereignty, although there's a clear direction of travel for councils to work more collaboratively for the benefit of their local communities. I just want to say that I strongly support that, and it's, for me, it's the right direction, and that would mean working even more closely with the city and with the neighbouring authorities of the Greater Nottingham. Thank you.
Any other comments, Councillor?
No, you go first. Come on.
Sorry, it's just hopefully a quick one on page 145. The council continues to promote a commercial culture. I mean, what does that even mean? And is it true? Oh, maybe.
Well, for me, it means it's maximising value for money in everything we do. That's what we should be doing. So we like to look to procure things as efficiently as we can. We look to deliver our services as efficiently as we can. We look to, in terms of recovering income, we try and maximise income recovery. So it's that type of thing. I've kept that in specifically because I think in the previous iteration of this, if you remember, those of you that well, I've spoken to this before when I've talked about the budget. If you remember, Sitford said we're not, almost said we're supposed to not really be commercial, otherwise you can't borrow. You know, some of the issues that you've seen with other councils where they've actually done things they shouldn't have done. So what I'm trying to get over is that whilst, yeah, we shouldn't be being stupid, that doesn't stop us being commercial.
Councillor Wheeler.
But one difference is we've not borrowed, we've actually used our own money to a large extent, so we've not gone into any debt, as opposed to other councils going into debt to do what they wanted to do, which is what, as you know, it's biting them on, well, on some of the real extremities at the moment for doing what they've done. I hear what you're saying, David, but I think actually the format is what is normal. It's what we've seen for year after year after year, but the clues and what you're looking for, the timescale reports are there, which are coming forth, and it's pinned out in the report anyway.
See what last year against this year, so how much it changed. Because it will change from year to year.
It will.
No, go on, you can do that, but
Yeah. Well, the bits it changed, the main bit, that's what I was talking about, 4.1. I mean, there are some factual changes, you know, where we've done, for example, consultation exercises and things like that. There's things like that will change, but there is a chunk. That's why I tried to avoid talking through a chunk of it, because all the stuff about the scrutiny groups and that's just no, but that's just. Yeah, but that you have to say that, because you have to report that is our structure for governance. I can't change it. I can't start inventing a committee, or you know, it's.
Yeah, just to pick up that, I think the timelines set on the report are very important. More information will emerge. The crucial part of all this is your budget workshops you referred to earlier on. That's where a lot of the detail emerges. Some councils would not have been through a budget workshop. Well, you couldn't. You knew, so you couldn't have been through one of those. And that's an opportunity, the level of scrutiny we're talking about there, to ask the questions of Peter and the finance team and the portfolio holder as well. It's an opportunity to get behind a lot of data, which I'm sure you will do. I suspect the budget workshop will probably be like no other budget workshop we've ever had, because the composition now councillors here. That's a good thing, in so much as that's what its challenge is all about. I think you would agree with that. So that's what I'm saying. So give it time, give it space. It'll come.
Just to be clear, I have some sympathy with Councillor Sims, because there is a chunk of this report, and for those of you that have seen it for the first time, actually you will find it more interesting because it's the first time you're seeing it. When you see it next year, that's why I said focus on that section 4, because that's really where the more nitty gritty stuff is.
Can I just go in? All I'm doing is scrutinising. That's it. And aiding debate, and this group tonight or this committee tonight has been fantastic because of that. So all I'm trying to do is aid debate, and I'm sure we'll have lots of discussions about, because each organisation sets its aims and objectives on what it wants to achieve with its annual governance statement. And I don't know whether we've actually reviewed that in the last 10 years. So it would be good. What are we trying to achieve by it? Are we just trying to give somebody 10 hours of work, just cut and paste in and or do we want to make it a meaningful document? Do you sort of what I'm saying? So this wasn't a criticism of you. I know we've got great officers and I know you do a great job. So I wasn't trying to criticize you. All I'm trying to do is try and get this governance group to scrutinise and improve the council.
Yeah.
Well, I look forward for some, some examples and recommendations, and I'll take that forward for next year.
Yeah.
And on that point, can I raise page 12? I'm looking at the individual reports. Despite the challenging economic environment, the council remains committed to reducing its carbon footprint. So I feel that that sentence undermines what comes after, and I wonder if it could be replaced with a sentence that talks about how likely or otherwise the council is to meet its climate change targets as a preamble to the subsequent paragraph. Thank you.
I'm not quite.
Well, I think, sorry, to explain, it's I would consider it a risk if that the council has that it does or doesn't reach its climate change targets. So I would have thought that should be addressed in here.
Do you want to comment on that? Okay.
Well, you don't.
No.
You would.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it is a challenge. I mean, I can flex the word into to reflect the fact that clearly it is a challenge, and there's always, I always say, with climate change and finance are not necessarily the best bedfellows.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I mean, so some of it does give rise to savings, but it also leads to a lot of investment and pump farming to start with.
Okay. Have we any further questions? So so the recommendation actually was to review and approve. I think we've reviewed. And I think we're happy to approve that then based on the discussions. Yeah. Okay. I think we had an email before this meeting to explain that this meeting doesn't always last this long, didn't we? But having looked at the agenda, I'm not surprised we're still here. It's scrutinising. So item 12, capital and investment strategy, quarter 4. So you're doing this one, aren't you?
Thank you. See how quickly I can do this then. Right, so this is the full year position for the Treasury Management and Asset Investment Strategy. Those of you that are new to the group may have attended, those of you that did attend a couple of weeks ago, some basics in Treasury Management, may have found that useful in reading this report. This has been to the group, this is the 4th time this year because we've now moved to quarterly reporting. So those of you that have been on the group will be aware of all the issues because they're not new. So I'll just run through the key points of this report. So paragraph 4.1 goes through potential indicators and shows that capital expenditure is higher than the original budget. This is to do with the crematorium and Bingham, which were brought forward from last year. Investments are higher than budget due to additional section 106s and the capital underspend. And paragraph 4.4 shows an increased CFR, and this is due to a delay in a capital receipt, which has slipped into the next financial year. Paragraph 4.9 shows details how the CFR is reduced each year by MRP payments. This is minimum revenue provision, which you may remember from the slides. And the table at 4.10 shows how this has moved due to those payments. Paragraph 4.11 to 4.14 summarises the prudential indicators relating to borrowing. But as already mentioned, we are debt free and do not have any external borrowing, so those indicators are not applicable to us. Paragraph 4.15 shows a ratio which is negative as we don't have any borrowing and our income currently exceeds MRP charges. Paragraph 4.16 shows net income from commercial and service income. Now, this is a new indicator that came out with the changes to the Prudential Code. Yeah, we're sort of low on this target, and it's in an acceptable range, so there's nothing to be concerned about in terms of that. But what it's aiming to demonstrate is that you're not overly reliant on your commercial income. Paragraph 4.17 shows that we have slightly exceeded our upper limits on fixed investment rates, and this is due to a very last-minute payment that wasn't expected to go out on the day that it did. So it was briefly a couple of days where we exceeded that, and it was a repayment of an accrual that had come through from a grant that needed to be repaid. Paragraph 4.19 shows a table of investments, and this, as you'll see through it, is actually a snapshot at a point in time. So you can see from that page that we are, I'm just trying to explode on that, can't see the page, that we have some investments in all the institutions, and they show the rates that we've achieved at that point, at where they were at that point in time. Since then, our rates are different, and you can see that some of them are lower than others, but they're to do with the timing of those investments. So some of them were invested for, say, a year or 9 months back when interest rates were much lower. And the more recent investments obviously are now attracting high rates. We have interest currently at 5%, Bank of England base rates currently at 5%. This is likely to continue to go up, and our investments are spread over a diverse portfolio, and a lot of that does have to be retained in cash for liquidity purposes. At the moment, cash is actually performing quite well because of the increase in bank rate, and this has led to excess of income on investment income over the budget, which was 673,000. We actually outturned at 1.139 million, getting an average rate of 3.79%. So that's almost double what the budget was. Our diversified funds, stated at paragraph 4.22, fluctuates over time. So these are intended to be long-term investments, and they do fluctuate over time. At the moment, we are down on those due to the economic climate by about 1.4 million, and we have put some money into a reserve to cover that risk. These do return, though, out of that 1.139 million that we had last year, 620,000 or so of that was from these investments alone. So just over 50% of our income was from those investments. So they have a good return. Paragraph 4.25 details reserves, movements and balances. There is a reduction in earmarked reserves, and this is mostly due to the release of a collection fund reserve to cover historical deficits that accrued over the COVID period for additional reliefs that were given by government. Overall, there is a risk and volatility on the economy, but performance has been overall good for us. Paragraph 4.27 onwards covers asset investments. We don't any longer invest in commercial, not any new commercial investments, purely for gain, and this is now prohibited by the Prudential Code in terms of borrowing for that purpose, but we do still need to report on our ongoing investments. These are shown at table 4.29 and shows an overall return of 5.41% for the year. Paragraph 4.30 shows the spread by sector, and you can see from that chart that it's predominantly office and industrial. 4.32 demonstrates our reliance upon commercial income. So we have been reporting on this for quite some time before the new Prudential Code brought in those targets. We set ourselves a target of 30%, and we're currently at 19.9%, so we're well within that range. Paragraph 4.34 explains that there is a new code requirement for members to be sufficiently trained. So this goes on to the basics training that you've already had. There we also have annual training by our Treasury advisors but we are going to have to do some assessment of your individual skills, do some individual training with you, as that's now a requirement of the code. So you've got that to look forward to in the next few months.
So that's every member of the scrutiny
Every
group.
member of the scrutiny group, yes. So in conclusion, we are in a very fluid environment, but we will continue to monitor as we always do and take advice from Treasury advisors and continue to do the best performance that we can.
Okay, any questions from other than obviously a fairly healthy position, I think, is what we expect from. Yes, Councillor Calvert.
There's a table that has the list of the financial institutions.
Yeah. It was 4.29.
Okay, well, it was just a query. I was wondering what the investments were with those 4 local authorities.
Do you want to?
What do you mean by this?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. You have to put you have to put your mic back on.
Oh yes. You wanted to know.
What do you mean by that question? Sorry.
Okay, there are 4 local authorities listed as financial institutions that we've invested about £5 million each in them, and I'm just wondering what that's about. They're borrowing money from us.
Yes, that's exactly right. It's quite common for local authorities to lend money to each other, and it means that sometimes they get preferential rates, and it just helps cash flow within local government.
Councillor Thomas.
I had a question about that as well. I wanted to know why some of the councils are getting better rates than others.
As I mentioned earlier, it's dependent upon when those investments were made. So those that were made earlier last year had obviously lower rates. If we were to make a deal today, obviously it would be at a much better rate than those.
Councillor Wheeler.
Just so, Chairman, we've been through a lot by listening to training, as you alluded to earlier on anyway. So I left the detail which you discussed at the training, well, you did anyway at the training. So we've been through a lot of this already before. This is why I think the training is so important, because it rolls into the sort of scrutiny meeting.
Yeah.
And it flows better that way, so that you can get that order of the training. Yeah. Just on, I mean, it is important. You will. I think this committee is more technical, I suppose, in terms of some of the things you will say, and obviously we try and help you as much as we can to understand and demystify, and hopefully not confuse, and hopefully not make things too bland for Councillor Simpson. But it is. But one thing we started doing last year, which we're trying to do this year, but hopefully if the meetings don't go on as long as this, is try and have we try and start with something a bit, do the training like an hour before, so you and then and keep things, hope as well as keeping things fresh. But it hopefully helps you with your time, you know, in terms of coming here. We always think the trainers it's better to do it in person. So.
That's good.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Thomas.
I just had a question on 4.17. It says resulted in explosion of 0.2% above the limit. And is that 50 going to 52%? So why is that 0.2% above the?
Can you turn your mic off so Sarah can answer?
So it's 0.2% over the 50% limit.
That's 2. You're right, it's 2%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
So,
2%.
yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I see.
Okay. Any other questions? So again, the recommendation is to discuss and approve. Yeah. Councillor Sims.
One question. From previous years, we've asked I think it's been asked many, and it's been agreed to be done many times, but I can't see where it's been done. A breakdown of investments, social investments, etc. Is that been broken down? You know, are we investing in oil and things like that? Do we know? Sorry. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I think we have covered this quite a few times on the Treasury advisors when they did their training in November did cover this, that it is very difficult and challenging to identify those. There is not a single standard comparison to be able to mark whether your investments are green or not green. There are, I appreciate what you're saying, there are some organisations that invest wholly in sustainable funds or those sort of things. A lot of other organisations have exclusion policies. So you can sort of go to them, and we have what you would be pleased to know is we've started to build our own, because there isn't anything that you can go and sort of mark against. Start to do some research with our investment providers into each individual fund, and it's not a simple job. For example, local authorities, as you've seen, we've got 5 million in a few local authorities. How do you grade how green they are, where that money's going? So it is really challenging, and we are doing our best to do it. We are contacting all of our brokers, and when we find investments that are sustainable green but also tick the other boxes, as I've said in the training, has to be secure, liquid, and then yield is last, and then ESG follows on from that. So if we're ticking all the boxes, they're on our counterparty list, and our advisors say that they're safe to invest with, then that's the choice that we make. But we do that within the group and within the Treasury team.
Thanks for that. As one of the few members of former government this group for many years, I felt compelled to ask the question. It would be great for us to still move forward on this, because I do believe that we could be an exemplar of good practice. Maybe next time we might win the award.
We'll go for some of the carbon reduction reward or something like that. So on that, I mean, Sarah's right about, because obviously ESG is a very topical subject. I know she did go through it with your presentation, but when Link come in, they'll talk a bit more about it as well. But it is, we are looking at more green investments and doing that. So there's sort of movement away in that area.
Okay. Councillor Regan.
Just on that point, is there anyone within our organisation who evaluates exactly that? So if we don't invest, if we don't use our capital, if we don't use our invest in funds that are green, do we have a better return on our green capital than they do? Is that evaluation? Is that balance? Or is that evaluated?
I'll say I'm not sure I understand your question. Sorry.
So simply put, who do we evaluate? Who gives the best green return on investment, or external investments or internal investments?
Our Treasury advisors can advise us which funds do give a good return, but ultimately the decision is down to us, our internal Treasury management team, as to who we invest with. But we do take consideration to the rates, but also other things as well.
I think it's fair to say that as you get more experience on this committee, you'll see more of the things that go on, and also get the training that we get will actually help us understand that a bit more. Is that a fair comment?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So,
I think I have a very high level of confidence in
yeah.
your ability and doing your investment documentation. My question was more whether we as an organisation could invest that on greening, on achieving our green goals, rather than using the capital external. So, for example, 13 or 14 million pounds we have on deposit.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
I think
It's a complex answer. It's a simple question.
Yeah, it is good. It is. It depends what you mean by green goals, because obviously, Councillor Birch focused a bit on it when we talk about reserves. We have reserves because we know we're going to have to spend a lot of money on capital linked to green. Whether it's the vehicles, whether it's our property. So we do know that sort of around. I mean, hopefully there'll be lots of external funding coming forth, but we can't rely on that. Okay.
So the recommendation here is that it's recommended that Government Scrutiny Group agrees the 2022-23 Act term position, which I think we can. I think we discussed it. Yep. Okay. So that brings us to the final item on the agenda, the Governance Scrutiny Work Programme. So are you going through this, Sarah? Yeah. trying to find the right pages.
Yeah,
As,
I've lost my bookmark. It's disappeared.
I've had the same problem.
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, to those of you that are new to the group, it is usually quite a full agenda. So as you can see on page 203, they at the moment look fairly evenly balanced in terms of agenda items. But just to point out that the statement of accounts is currently on for the 28th of September meeting. However, as mentioned by audit while they were here, they're sort of aiming and planning for an October completion, so it's more likely to slip into the 23rd of November meeting instead. The other items on the agenda are standard items that you'll see every time, so internal audit progress, risk management comes twice a year, and then the capital and investment strategy monitoring is also now quarterly, so you see that at each of the meetings. Other than that, nothing else really to mention.
So everyone, that's there. There's no recommendation or anything. That's the facts. So thanks to everyone for persevering with this meeting. I think, as I said earlier, we did have an email beforehand to point out that this meeting normally, despite the length of the agenda, but I think I have to say when I saw the agenda and particularly the changes to the constitution, I'm pretty sure we were going to have a discussion, and hopefully we'll not run over quite so much in future meetings.